Our second to last weekend of NFL slates for the 2022 NFL season is here this weekend. It is a very sad time, but it's a fun slate. Fun couple of slates here. Both the 2-game slate and the individual single-game slates are enticing, I think, for the conference championships. We're going to break down both those games, let you know our favorite plays and priorities for the 2-game slate on FanDuel and both single-game slates as well, and get you set for what should be a fun Sunday of football on FanDuel. Welcome on in to the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast, powered by numberFire. That's right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and numberFire.com. My name is Jim Sonis. I am a senior writer and analyst for numberFire.com. Joined here, as always, by Brandon Gdula. He is the senior managing editor of numberFire.com. Brandon, second to last round of slates of this year. How are you doing today?
Yeah, some might say penultimate.
Some would not. I can't. We've had this discussion. I'm not doing it.
Yeah, but I'm
not doing it. So quit asking.
I'm just leaving it there. I'll let you.
You should leave it there. Never address it ever again. The most overused relative to its utility, interest, and intrigue is the word penultimate. It is aggressively overused. It's awful.
This is just wild because visually,
visually it's a great word. Out loud, it's stupid.
Let's say visually, like on the YouTube stream, you're like in all black and you're like coming out like a curmudgeon about that word. I got like a nice white
curmudgeonly. What?
Look, it takes one to know one. So, but I'm wearing my lovely new hat that I won from Jim in our NFL head-to-head competition.
This is also a head-to-head hat, by the way, bro.
Showed up and it's a throwback Denver Nuggets hat. It is by far the boldest hat that I own now, but yeah, I mean, I'm just out here like, look, penultimate's a fun word. We don't get to say it a lot.
Stop saying it. Yes, we do. People say it all the time. Ugh.
There's only one chance to say it for certain.
No, because there is a penultimate golf event of the year. There is a penultimate NFL slate of the year.
Name all the sports.
I will. Like, there are so many things that use that word, and it's not a good word. It's visually pleasing. So if you're writing it, fine, eat your heart out. But like, saying it's a dumb word. It's overused. People say it every time this comes up, and I refuse to be a part of big penultimate.
Do you sub-vocalize when you read?
I don't know what that means.
Like, do you hear the words in your head, or do you
Yes.
So then, how is it fine?
I read so slow. I'm a very slow reader. I've been made fun of for this all my entire life. So thank you for bringing up a sore subject. But I read slow. Appreciate it.
I figured you wouldn't like reading it if you don't like to.
I don't like read. I'm a bad reader. Like, the science portion of the ACT is the one that involves most reading, and that was my worst section by a wide margin. I can't read. I'm like literate, but I can't read.
Well, I'll talk about my simulations later, but the only reason I scored well on the SATs is because the essay portion of it. Because
I purposely picked colleges that didn't take the SATs, so I wouldn't have to take them. I refused to apply to a school that required me to take the SATs. So, again, this confirms your prior that I am pretty hard-headed. That began at a young age and has not quit. I refuse to say the P word that you are pushing so hard on this podcast. We're going to dive. Go ahead.
Well, speaking of like being stubborn, I'm very excited to hear about how you manually pulled the top score for each team on this league.
Yeah, well, whatever. I did go through each of the 4 teams' games, outline their highest score in each game. It was not efficient, but it's my summer. I can be inefficient and still be fine with it. Also, I learned from the process, Brandon. So maybe get on my level. We're going to break down what that data said, break down our thoughts on both these games, starting off with 49ers at Eagles here in just 1 second. But first, a reminder to make sure you are subscribed to the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed, wherever you get your podcast, because the Daily ISO continues on with Tom Vecchio breaking down daily fantasy basketball every weekday here on the feed. Also, PGA, UFC for select events. So we'll have NASCAR for the Daytona 500 coming up in a couple weeks as well. So that'll be a good time as always. To get all those as they go live, make sure you are subscribed to Covering the Spread wherever you get your podcasts. And while you're there, if you like what you hear, leave us a rating and review. If you want some betting thoughts on the conference championships, I had Ryan Williams on Covering the Spread today to break down both these games, and some jabroni named Brandon Gdula will be on with me tomorrow to break down props over on Covering the Spread. With football season winding down, this weekend is your final shot to get in on the GMC Sierra Mountain Climber Pickup. It's a free contest series that FanDuel and GMC are running for a chance at your share of $10,000 in cash prizes. Simply go to the contest and answer questions around Sunday's games. The more questions you answer correctly, the higher up the mountain you'll move. During any week, you answer every question correctly for a perfect score. You'll reach the summit and win your share of $10,000 in site credit. The contest is now live at FanDuel.com/free/contest/GMC today to start climbing the mountain. FanDuel.com/free/contest/GMC for the GMC Sierra Mountain Climber Pickup. Now, Brandon, before we dive into the 49ers at Eagles, I did want to get your overall thoughts on this slate. And I think when I'm thinking about this two-game slate or the individual slates holistically, everything for me comes down to making assumptions around injuries, specifically with Christian McCaffrey and Patrick Mahomes. I think you got to go in and assume they are either hampered by these injuries, because I think both guys should play, or you assume they are downgraded and then make assumptions based on that. So that to me is the key thing for the weekend, is deciding A, how healthy you think they'll be, and then B, deciding ripple effects from that assumption. What stands out to you as being the overall keys to these two games?
Yeah, pretty similar for me, but it's more like taking a stand in a sense. Like, we know that everyone's going to be trying to guess right on the Mahomes injury, Christian McCaffrey's usage, because it's one thing if like McCaffrey is healthy, they still might not use it. Like, I know like could be last game of the year, you're not gonna like limit him entirely, but like, they have other playmakers, and so he's not their only hope. So like, take a stand on, okay, well, McCaffrey's healthy, but he's still gonna like lose high leverage carries to like Deebo Samuel, or red zone work, like they're going to try to throw the ball more. And one I think the one stand that is most prominent is, and this will sound strange, but Brock Purdy. Like, take a stand on whether you think Brock Purdy is like the versus Seattle Brock Purdy, where he throws for over 300 yards, 3 touchdowns, puts up production, or if you think that he's limited, let's keep the ball away from Brock Purdy, no touchdowns, like under 10 points. Because if you think that, Brock Purdy is going to be just like game manager, then you have to allocate, because we only have so many quarterbacks, like you have to allocate salary for quarterback, and that's going to change a lot of other things. So, basically it's not as simple as like, if you want to play Travis Kelce, you're going to have to play Brock Purdy. It's not that simple, but like, right. We have some tight ends who can change the slate. We have receivers who can change the slate. Take a stand on these individual like games. Make those assumptions. Take a stand on, I think that the 49ers and Eagles, actually, despite the defenses, is going to be a high-scoring game, and therefore that changes everything. Because if you just have sprinkles of every different player, statistically speaking, you're going to have a hard time having like a good weekend.
Yeah. And the benefit of a smaller slate is you can make those assumptions, and you can assume within 1-2 game lineup, you can assume, I think the Eagles roll in this one. I think that the Bengals roll in this one, kind of map that out and ask yourself who benefits in those scenarios, not to make the same assumptions I just made, but like,
right.
Kind of map it out that way. And if you're doing that, you don't have to be that weird to be different, because very different players will benefit from very different scripts. So kind of map that out in your head and decide, okay, for this lineup, I assume X and Y happens across these two games, and allow the lineup to fit your line of thought there. Let's dive in here to the 49ers at the Eagles, the first game on this slate right now. Eagles are 2.5-point favorites, and the total is 46.5. Injuries in this game: Christian McCaffrey and Eli Mitchell both missed practice Wednesday. McCaffrey has a calf injury. Mitchell's is a groin. I think McCaffrey is good to go. I haven't seen a ton of Mitchell. I knew he was proclaimed as being day-to-day earlier on this week. A little surprised by him popping up here on the injury report. I was surprised he mentioned on Monday and didn't expect him to be here. And I think that does impact things a bit and could benefit Deebo Samuel. Deebo Samuel was expected to sit out practice yesterday, but did get in a limited session with an ankle injury. Sounds like it's a lingering thing. It's not a new thing, which is fine. He had the ankle injury late in the season, came back week 18. Sounds like he'll be good to go. A.J. Brown not listed on the injury report despite suffering a hip injury in the divisional round. So, Brandon, when you look at this game, what is the key thing that stands out to you?
Again, I'm going to go back to Brock Purdy in the sense of what to expect from the 49ers offense. Honestly, like these smaller slates are harder to break down because you take more detailed notes and there's like less of a natural flow and you can kind of start anywhere and then things can get overlooked. But if you look at this team and their matchup, like Philly is the top adjusted pass defense in football, according to numberFire's metrics. They're a bottom 5 rush defense. So everything says run the ball. Well, we just talked about the running backs being hurt. So like, what are they going to do there? Now, this team since week 14 with Purdy, I have their adjusted seconds per play at 32.8. They're a slow team. Raw pass rate of 47%. Pass rate over expectation of about 5 points below 0. But if you look at games for San Francisco against bottom 10 adjusted rush defenses, their pass rate over expectation on the whole season as like a team drops to negative 9.1. So like they're already run heavy. If you adjust for game context, they're still run heavy. And then if you look at like what they've tried to do against like beatable rush defenses, they've run the ball a lot. And so, yes, I'm talking about like Brock Purdy, and clearly we're not like itching to play Brock Purdy with 3 high upside quarterbacks. That's not really what I'm getting at. Is this team going to try to take the ball out of his hands, grind the clock, and have this game have as few plays as possible? Because if that's your assumption, you can still say, well, I think the Bengals roll, but I think like Mahomes is still doing stuff and like with his pass catchers and his skill position players, that's actually better than what we're going to get from the 49ers and Eagles, because that game is just going to be, like a 17-14 game, and the other game is going to be more prominent. So I think for this game, it's trying to figure out what to expect from the 49ers.
Yeah. And my total model does kind of back up the thought process of this game might be a bit more disappointing, both due to the rush heavy nature of it, but also like 2 really good defenses. I have the total in this game at 44.7. So under the total of 46.5 right now. And then the other game I have a 48.4. That is with a downgrade from Mahomes in there. Both these games have similar wind concerns, around 9 or 8 miles per hour. So that's not a huge factor, but there's a 4-point gap between these 2 games. That's decently big on a 2-game slate. So I think to me, this is the less appealing game from an overall game and environment perspective, which does impact my view of Jalen Hurts relative to Patrick Mahomes, Joe Burrow. I still think he's firmly in that discussion because he's a very good passer. His rushing has been great, but that's the concern I have there. And also my numbers have the 49ers like a slight favorite. That's kind of weird, I think, but it's noteworthy, I think, for the game overall. I think the big thing in this game is tracking Christian McCaffrey's injury. They said on Monday it was a calf contusion, which is a bruise, which is odd because he had like this thing on his leg on the sidelines, which I'm sure you all saw. And it sounds like that's more so used for like cramping and for like muscle strains. So that's not a bruise. And that is odd to me. So I think that we say this a lot. If Christian McCaffrey gets in a full practice on Friday, then I will make him a priority once again because, Eli Mitchell's also banged up. We saw McCaffrey still get a lot of high leverage work in that game last week. And like you said, they might go pretty run heavy here. So if then on McCaffrey, if he's full in practice Friday, full steam ahead, if he is limited, even if he's taken off the injury report, but listed as limited Friday, I will be lower on him. And I think the other takeaway for me is as a result of those 2 injuries to Christian McCaffrey and Eli Mitchell, I am going to be very high on Deebo Samuel. And I think that across the 2-game slate and across the single game slate, there is nobody on this weekend who is more under salary than Deebo Samuel. You can make the assumption that the 49ers go run heavy here, which I think is a fair assumption based on the stuff you said about what they do against non-elite rush defenses. I think that's a fair assumption, but Deebo still benefits there. So that's why I am drawn towards him. If we're looking at the most relevant sample on this 49ers team, it's the games with McCaffrey healthy and with Deebo healthy. In those games, Deebo 7.6 targets per game, McCaffrey at 6 targets per game, Brandon Ayuk 5.7, George Kittle 3.9, Juwan Jennings 3.7. So Deebo's getting good work, even though they have been generally pretty run heavy. So I think to me, Deebo is the priority across all the slates this weekend. And McCaffrey, if he gets in a full practice Friday, will be firmly in the MVP discussion for single game slates. I think it'd just be just him and Hurts if he gets in a full practice. If McCaffrey doesn't get a full practice, I might just go Hurts in every lineup at MVP for the single game slate.
Yeah.
Or maybe Deebo, I guess. Maybe some Deebo.
Yeah. I think you could look, it's one of those situations where like you can kind of make a case for a few options in any game that has like viable candidates on a single game slate, especially in the playoffs where, you know, everyone's going to be getting in on things. Like, would it surprise me if like Miles Sanders was MVP, but it wouldn't really. So like, I don't want to take too many guys off the table, but as a priority, yeah, like my simulation model is, let's just say more than half the time Jalen Hurts is projected to be the top scorer in that game. Mm-hmm. McCaffrey, like while limited, like scaled back a bit with his projection, so about 25%. So like kind of do the math where like at least 75% or so of the lineups should probably have one of those two. Still leaves 25%. And obviously you want to take advantage of being right whenever consensus is sort of wrong. But yeah, I mean, as priorities in this game, McCaffrey still, even if limited, has the potential to be a true MVP candidate. It's because Eli Mitchell is also banged up. So like,
right.
You know,
that's the key
we don't know
thing
how
to
healthy
me.
he is. Yeah.
Right. If he were fully healthy, it'd be a different discussion, I think.
Yeah, I'd be worried.
I think that is an under-discussed aspect of all of this. Is Eli Mitchell. How big, let's say McCaffrey gets in a full practice on Friday, how big of a priority for you would he be on the 2-game slate at that point?
Full by Friday?
Yeah.
Very big, because the only other, you know, I don't want to box like Jerick McKinnon, Isaiah Pacheco, and Miles Sanders into some sort of like low upside box because they have paths to get there.
You probably can put them in that box.
But I think I can probably put them in there. And then, you know, I don't want to get ahead of myself on like Joe Mixon, but in this reality where McCaffrey is full by Friday, great band name. Great movie title as well. But there's nobody who can touch him. It's like a Travis Kelce at running back situation, but more predictable in a good rushing matchup.
Right. And we also will get him at a reduced roster rate as a result of the fact that he was being subbed out late in that game. Even if he does wind up being full on Friday, I think people will still be scared of him as a result of that. I think that's going to keep his roster rate in check, regardless of what happens, which is a good thing for us. So I would say McCaffrey does become a full priority because it just means it's one less running back slot I have to fill with someone who is lower upside than him. Let's talk about Hurts on the 2-game slate. We do have Joe Burrow and Patrick Mahomes. Hurts obviously has a big edge in terms of rushing projection for this week. Also has decent, I would say, passing projections because they have been at times decently pass heavy, more so than you might think, I guess, anecdotally. Where are you on Hurts? We like him for the single game slate. What about the 2-game slate? How does he grade out to Burrow and Mahomes for you there?
Yeah, so he's pretty easily the best projected play for me whenever you look at like a combination of floor and ceiling projections at salary. I just have him number one pretty comfortably. I'm not that concerned about the matchup I'm more concerned about the overall game flow. Like,
Yeah.
it could be stupid to be a little dismissive of the matchup itself, but for me, I'm a little bit more like this game. They might not run a ton of plays. Like,
Yeah.
this is one of those games where I DVR a lot of games. I don't like to watch a lot of live games. I'll watch the games live this week, but if I was going to DVR it, it'd be one of those where like it'd be over before I realized it, or like
Yeah.
after a few clicks of the button, between plays, it's like, oh, there's 3 minutes left in the second quarter, and I feel like there's been like a quarter's worth of action because the clock's going to keep running.
Right.
So
Like if this game is 20-17, are you surprised?
No, not at all.
Yeah.
I would be infinitely more surprised if each team scores like 30.
Yeah.
Not because of efficiency. Like, I'm not that worried. Like, I am worried about the defenses to a degree. It's more like the combination of that plus the clock moving and these teams wanting to, keep the clock moving, but still kind of run some plays. So like, I think for me, the issue isn't the matchup. It's simply whether this game is sort of limited or not.
Yeah. I think that's the same place I come from. Fully agree with you there. Let's talk about the 49ers non-Debo pass catchers. We have Brandon Ayuk at $6,000 on FanDuel for this week. George Kittle's salary comes in at $6,800. Then you have Juwan Jennings with a salary down at $4,900. I think Juwan Jennings on the single game slate is very interesting because his salary there is down at $7,500 for someone with his role. He gets some deep work, stuff like that. For the full slate, I might be underweight on every single one of those guys. Ayuk grades out, like Ayuk is very interesting at salary at 6,000. To get some deep work, but the matchup is pretty tough here with the Eagles outside corners, and I agree with you where I think they'll be pretty run heavy. Kittle's salary is pretty high for what kind of volume he gets, so I might wind up being underweight on Ayuk and Kittle. Where are you on the non-Debo Samuel pass catchers?
Yeah, so through 2 playoff weeks, we know like George Kittle had that sweet catch, gave a nice post game interview, but 2 targets, 5 targets for 3.5. Hasn't scored in the playoffs, but it's a 2-game sample there. I'm not that concerned about like scoring potential. It's more just overall volume. He's really taken a back seat, and he seems like he's okay taking sort of a back seat. But his catch rate over expectation through the playoffs is plus 33%. Again, we're looking at 7 total targets. I understand like how that can fluctuate, but if he didn't catch like all those, he would not have like, again, I understand like the take away good plays and guys aren't going to score points, but there's a big risk in playing George Kittle and having him see 3 targets. And I don't think that it's like that unlikely that he does. I'd probably rather play a different tight end in this game. We can talk about that in a second. So for me, like I can't really get to Kittle. Ayuk, I'm more all right with just because I need three receivers. But boy, I'm not like feeling great about. Again, it goes back to the Brock Purdy situation. You might see it differently, like not you, but like anyone might see it differently. I just kind of feel like we're going to see limited Brock Purdy in 2 games against top 10 pass defenses. He's got 25.5 attempts per game. It's like been efficient, but takes sacks like that can, kill drives. So I want to find ways to move away from the 49ers pass catchers. And I'm sure everyone wants to do that. So a very easy thing to do is like play Brock Purdy, Brandon Ayuk, and George Kittle, and you'll be very different. And it's not the dumbest thing to do because there is a path for these guys to maybe play from behind even and get a little. Sure. And so I don't know. I think I'm just low on the pass catchers in general outside of Debo.
I agree. In the single game slate, again, I like Jennings at 75. I think he's pretty interesting there. But Ayuk at 95 is right by Dallas Goedert at 10,000. I think Goddard is a pretty easily superior play there. Miles Sanders at 11,000 superior play to Ayuk, and I think he's better than Kittle too at 11.5. So I think both for the single game slate and the 2-game slate, those guys not really high on my list. Speaking of Goddard, you mentioned him as being a guy you may turn to in this exact game. Goddard's salary this week is $6,400. We have Devontae Smith at 77, AJ Brown 8,000. I think the Goddard is really fun relative to that salary for both the single game and full slate. Where are you on the Eagles pass catchers?
It's so easy to play them because it's just three guys. Mm-hmm. And, you could probably say like the 49ers are three guys, but these are three guys who like we feel good with, and there's not Christian McCaffrey lurking in the backfield. So Goddard last week, 88% of the routes, 5 targets, 58 yards, the touchdown, 3 red zone targets. Like he's, you don't copy and paste that. Like I understand that, but the role itself, frankly, is a lot better than like George Kittle's in terms of like route volume. But not that like Kittle's run 82% of the routes in the playoffs. I'm not trying to say like it's a cavern, but if I could bet Dallas Goedert to get more targets than George Kittle, I would. So
minus 140, probably somewhere around there. Yeah.
And like, there's more to it, but Dallas Goedert has yards after catch potential. He's
a good player too. Yeah.
Yeah, he's good. So I think for me, I'm going to play a lot of Jalen Hurts, and I think I might take the stand that Jalen Hurts just has a good game despite the defensive matchup, and then therefore I will play all 3 of his pass catchers, and I would not rule out flexing Dallas Goedert. I put him at tight end and then someone else in because he plays earlier. But if I need 2 tight ends, I think that's viable this week.
Yeah, you're kind of comparing Travis Kelce at 85 to the receivers at 85. That might be tougher with Jamar Chase being there, but Goddard at 64 compared to like Ayuk and Juju Smith-Schuster, I might go Goddard over both those guys. That's fair.
Sure. Straight up, I'm going to take Jamar Chase over Travis Kelce.
Yeah.
But there are realities where Travis Kelce outscores Jamar Chase, and so I'm going to flip that around sometimes.
The other guy worth discussing in this game is Miles Sanders. And Sanders has been disappointing so far, and he hasn't seen the role increase I thought he might get. Part of that last week was due to script because in the first half, Sanders had a 59% snap rate in the first quarter, 50% second quarter, 33% third quarter, 12% fourth quarter. So as the game got out of reach, his role scaled down. I am going to go into this slate, the single game slate and the 2 game slate, assuming that he gets a role increase in a more neutral script. A role increase, I think, will still be below a 60% snap rate, but I don't think he needs a 70% snap rate to pay off when his salary is down to just $6,200. I think Sanders is my preferred non-McCaffrey running back play on this slate. The favorite guy I like there at $6,200 on FanDuel. I do like him on the single game slate too, coming in at 11,000. Am I dumb to have confidence in Miles Sanders given how mediocre his fantasy season has been?
No, I'm not going to fight you on having Miles Sanders second. I don't know that he's a big jump above the 2 Chiefs backs. I guess the case you could say is, well, there's 2 of them and 1 of Sanders, but there's also the 1B is just 2 guys for the Eagles too, plus Jalen Hurts. So I would think that Mahomes is not going to run. I know that he showed the willingness to do that. Just assuming there's a lot of shotgun for the Chiefs and kind of a little bit higher on Pacheco as a result of just assuming there's a little bit more rushing. But I see the case for Sanders. I see the case for having him scale up. I would be surprised though if he has a whole lot of yardage here. It'd be more of a touchdown play. So my question to you is: are you more in the mindset of playing Sanders along with Hurts, or playing Sanders as a way to get away from Hurts and Hurts doesn't throw the touchdowns or run for the touchdowns? Are you more likely to pair them together, assuming a huge game, or more likely to play Sanders so that you can play Mahomes or Burrow instead?
Single game slate, I'd probably go them together. Just because I'm kind of assuming that the Eagles get out front. Full slate, probably separate, more likely.
Okay.
Because if I have Hurts, because of Goddard's role, I'm likely to pair him with Goddard, likely to pair him with Devontae Smith, AJ Brown.
Yeah.
And at that point, if Hurts gets a rushing touchdown and it's throwing touchdowns to them, the odds that Sanders also pays off are a bit lower.
Yeah.
So I would say Hurts, I'm more likely to pair with Pacheco, but because I like Mahomes and Burrow a bit more than I like Hurts, I'm more likely to have them at quarterback. And as a result, that puts me a bit higher on Miles Sanders, if that makes sense.
No, it does. And like, I know that our playoff podcasts kind of come down to like, well, however you want to play it is like more than likely fine, especially in these games. Like, statistically speaking, Hurts plus one of the Chiefs backs is probably the higher floor play. But we know that like there are situations in which it's Burrow or Mahomes plus Sanders that is the right play. So like there's no right answer. What's important is thinking about, you know, like not just jamming in Miles Sanders with Jalen Hurts. Of course, that could be in the perfect lineup, but that's whenever you say I think Hurts is either going to throw for 4 touchdowns and Sanders will like run for 2, or no running backs will score any points, so it doesn't matter. Like you got to think about why you're playing guys together or not.
Right. Especially because you can on this slate. You're not forced to do anything. You actually do have options. So I think that is a fair way to think of it. Before we close up here, do you want to talk to you about the ancillary running backs in this game? We're generally not super enthused about the running back options on this slate, which could increase the thought to saving salary on some like Eli Mitchell at 56. You got Kenneth Gainwell 54, Boston Scott 49. Gainwell was the guy who closed out the game last week, but his overall role is not great. He does get some passing game work, does operate in the red zone a decent amount. He's the minute back. There's a path there. Mitchell would be like kind of assuming A, he's healthy. Like I would want a full practice Friday before I go super high on him. And B, that the 49ers get ahead. And Boston Scott, I can't really envision a scenario where he is a difference maker. So I won't go to Scott. I'm unlikely to go Gainwell. And I need a full practice from Mitchell Friday to get there. Where are you on the secondary running backs in this game?
Yeah, so Gainwell ended that game last week with a 36% snap rate to Scott's 23%. In the first half, though, it was 26-21 for Gainwell over Scott. So Scott didn't really like change a whole lot. Gainwell got that surge as Sanders got scaled back. The that role shift that you talked about. So there's not a whole lot there. As to the point of like, I can't see Boston Scott being a difference maker. I agree with you, but if Boston Scott scores a 2-yard touchdown and Christian McCaffrey does not like have a good game, having Boston Scott in your lineup and hitting on like Kelsey and Jamar Chase stacks with like Burrow or Mahomes, that is a difference making play, which we're not accustomed to on like a full slate because that's not enough. But if the nut stack is like Burrow or Mahomes and like Chase and T. Higgins and Kelsey, like in that case, Boston Scott scoring like 7 points is a difference maker. So
in that scenario, are you more likely to use Scott or Samaje Perine at 53? So I feel like you're kind of assuming that game shoots out.
Yeah. So like I'm not talking up Boston Scott. I'm just saying like it's easy to write off Boston Scott, but it's a bet against Christian McCaffrey and like Joe Mixon and saying that no running back score points.
Well, no, it's also a bet against McKinnon, Pacheco, and Sanders. So those guys can do, and Mitchell too. Like I think you're betting against enough backs where even some lower salary backs where it's not a bet I'm going to make personally.
All right, let me see here real quick. If I go like, never mind, I can't do this all on the fly. It'll be too boring.
So Boston Scott in the 16 games he's played, 3.8 carries per game, 0.4 targets, 16.5 yards per game. Gainwell's at 30.8 yards per game in his most relevant sample. Perine 26.5. Mitchell 53.8. So I think if we get Mitchell as an option, like if he's full in practice, then I see no reason to consider these other guys because his paths to a good game are so much easier to envision.
Okay.
But
so if you go like high salaried stack, you want both of the top receivers on the slate, Jamar Chase, AJ Brown, with Kelsey. I know this is sounding like too many, high salary pass catchers, but you go Joe Burrow, who's the lowest of the quarterbacks. You need 2 running backs, a receiver, and a flex, and you're down to like 56.50. there is a reality in which like Burrow, Chase, Kelsey, AJ Brown have good games. No running backs do, and you really can't just say, well, I'll play Pacheco and like Miles Sanders. In that case, like if you're saying these certain guys go off, Boston Scott's like 4 points might be enough to make it work. Again, we're not like saying that's a priority, but
I guess what
think
I'm saying is there's not a big difference between Scott and Gainwell and Pirine, and it's a lot easier for me to envision them doing well than him.
sure, yeah, like I'm with you. I'm probably
Okay.
not making that clear enough, but
Okay.
usually we're writing off a Boston Scott or a Samaje Pirine. The situation in which you'd play them is because you're banking on the pass, which is obvious, but it's not how we talk about slates usually. So I think
Yeah.
it's important that we like clarify that.
Okay. So for you on the 2-game slates, who in this game is a priority for you? And then on the single game slate, who are you deeming a priority there for this game?
Okay. Priority on the 2-game slate from here. I do want to put, well, McCaffrey if he's full,
Correct.
Debo either way,
Agreed.
Dallas Goddard.
I would say Goddard on the single game slate is a borderline priority at 10,000.
I want to say Hurts, but I'm going to be okay going with the quarterbacks in the AFC game.
Yeah.
As well, so
single game slate, I would say Hurts is a priority. McCaffrey with Hurts would be a priority if McCaffrey gets full practice because their projection is so much higher than everyone else.
Yeah.
You leaves you 91.67 left. I can get there. That's fine. Like go to Juwan Jennings at 75. I can make that work pretty easily. So that's what I would say for the single game slate. And then I really want to get to, I think Eli Mitchell's great for the single game slate at 8,000 if he's full in practice. And then Mitchell with McCaffrey, totally fine. It requires a specific script, but in general, not opposed to that. And then I do like Miles Sanders in both formats as well. Not a priority in the 2-game slate, but I don't really think there is a running back priority outside of McCaffrey if he's full. So
yeah,
that's the reason for it.
Yeah, it's a bet against, you can bet against the running backs doing anything relevant and everything's just split up.
Okay. Any final thoughts for you on this one?
Think we covered it. Should we talk defenses at all?
No.
Okay.
Let's talk about Bengals at Chiefs. Now I had to change the graphic for this game midstream because the Chiefs are favored once again at FanDuel Sportsbook. It is now the Chiefs -1. The total in this game is 47.5, -112 on the over, -108 on the under. And the reason why we've seen this move is because Patrick Mahomes got in a full practice on Wednesday. He's going to play. He may not be 100%, but everything I see tells me he'll be decently effective. Like I have a downgrade in and I saw the Chiefs favored by 2.8 points. So I don't know. I can't go super far with this. I think Mahomes is healthy and I'm going to work on that assumption. Mecole Hardman limited in practice Wednesday. Clyde Edwards-Helaire continues to practice. He is not yet activated, but could be before Sunday's game. Alex Kappa and Jonah Williams for the Bengals, their offensive lineman missed practice Wednesday. Zach Taylor left the door open for them to play. So it's not a lock they sit. I think if they play and if Mahomes continues to do what he's been doing, this game has legitimate, like full slate shootout potential. And that's why I'm higher on the 2 quarterbacks here. So let's talk about Mahomes first, Brandon. I'm comfortable with his health to the point where I will go into this slate making the assumption on the single game slate and the 2-game slate that Patrick Mahomes is 80% himself. And if I make that assumption, he's a pretty good play and everyone on the Chiefs is a pretty good play. And this game is more likely to shoot out. Are you comfortable enough with Mahomes' health to make a similar assumption?
Yeah, if this is how they're playing it, then that's pretty telling. They could have probably been, with the high ankle, like they could have been more coy if they wanted, and but I think it's like a no, we're ready to go kind of statement, and that's awesome because the Bengals keep beating the Chiefs, so they probably want to try to impose some sort of dominance before the game, but. This is very different than when Mahomes got hurt in game. Like they can now game plan around. I will lose it if he goes under center again for like the first snap after he came back. That drove me nuts.
Yeah.
They did end up, according to my data, in the second half in that game, have an 87% shotgun rate.
Mhm.
Their season rate entering that game was 79%, so they did bump that up, but I just don't know why they were having him, drop back from under center. They should stand him back there, hand it off to Pacheco, throw it to McKinnon, throw it to Kelsey, just kind of do all this. So like they can prep for it, and I feel
Yeah.
confident that they'll figure out ways to do it. They did play a little bit slower in terms of pace, even if you would sort of try to adjust for game context. But I don't really think that's an issue, especially compared to the other game. Like everything's contextual in this, on a 2-game slate. Their raw pass rate wasn't super high, but their pass rate over expectation in the second half was over 10 points. So um, I'm with you. Like this game, and I'm just in general going to play the angle that the Eagles and 49ers, not to say like it's going to be a terrible sort of offensive game. I think there'll be some efficiency, but I think that they're just going to keep the clock moving to the point that there's not enough points to contend with this one. And as much as I would like to say, yeah, that's obvious, that's how everyone's going to play it, based on the totals being as close as they are between these two games, I don't necessarily know that it's that obvious. So I'm with you. Like Mahomes, feel good. Love Mahomes and the Chiefs this week.
Yep. And my hope is that people, like last week with the Bengals, people got super fixated on the offensive line stuff, which I love offensive line play. I typically am on board. It got out of hand to the point where I believe Brock Purdy was more heavily rostered than Joe Burrow on the 4-game slate, which is absurd to me. And I think we might see something similar this week where we've seen everything has pointed to Mahomes being healthy for this game. And so I want to make that assumption. And I'm hoping that the public is wary of the Chiefs, wary of Mahomes because of this injury, and it keeps things suppressed. Now, you were talking about them going the shotgun more often. And I find that interesting because I have interest in Isaiah Pacheco for this week. And more traditional running backs typically suffer when a team operates from shotgun versus under center. And that's true for the Chiefs backs too. If we look at the Chiefs this year, when the Chiefs are under center, Jerick McKinnon has a 44.8% success rate. It's a very good number. Pacheco's 53%. So he's an amazing runner when they operate under center, which makes sense. You get a running head start, stuff like that. When they go shotgun, though, Pacheco's success rate is still 47%, which is pretty good, whereas McKinnon's is 26%. I think that we'll see McKinnon's snap rate increase as they go more shotgun. We saw that in the divisional round, where his snap rate is around 60-something%, whereas Pacheco was under 30%. But I still think that Pacheco can be effective, and I still think they'll be willing to use Pacheco in the shotgun if they do decide to go that way. So I was talking about Miles Sanders before. I think that Sanders is the second best running back behind Christian McCaffrey if he's full on this slate. I would put Pacheco right near him, and I think I could be stupid in this, but I'd probably put both those guys above Joe Mixon at $8,100, mostly due to salary. I think that Mixon has played well recently. I think that his role might be understated by his snap rates because he got it, 23.5 just opportunities per game. Since he came back from his return, he's at 85.8 yards per game. That's not bad. It's a little high for 81. And Isaiah Pacheco, though, in 9 full games without CEH, is at 87 yards in scrimmage per game. So he's actually higher than Mixon despite having a lower salary of almost $2,000. So to me, even with the thought process that they may go shotgun more often, which could in theory hurt the more like rush first back in Pacheco, I still think that he is at worst the third best running back on the slate above Joe Mixon. Where are you on Pacheco, McKinnon, and Mixon in this game?
Like the Chiefs backs. Okay, so I was trying to pull this up. It just took a while because I have a lot open. The Chiefs from shotgun do have a league high pass rate over expectation of 16.4% for a raw pass rate of about 71%. Despite that, I'm with you because I don't think it's the same sort of shotgun. They're not going to abandon the run entirely. Especially with like Pacheco seemingly getting more involved with this offense. Whether like it's truly bared out, it just feels like his fingerprints are more in this offense.
He's
And
playing well too.
so that's the thing is like he's playing well. I don't think that he's going to be taken off the field just because they're playing more out of the shotgun. And again, there were still 13% of the snaps in the second half alone. If Mahomes is actually full, then they'll kind of go back to probably closer to like 80% shotgun rate. But like I'm not that concerned. And with his rushing potential, and if you play the angle of like Kansas City's going to get ahead because Mahomes is efficient, there's still like a lot of leverage there. So I think Pacheco and McKinnon I'm higher on than Joe Mixon because of the role and because of the salary. My question to you though, and I'm not like trying to put you on the spot with this, but sometimes whenever I talk about a certain player who I think is oversalaried and I say I think he's oversalaried because of what like the role is, and you say, well, we know what the ceiling is, and I don't care about the floor. I want the ceiling. Do you think that Joe Mixon no longer has like a 3 touchdown, 2 touchdown, like 125-yard ceiling anymore because of the role?
I think he still has that.
Okay.
Because we kind of saw shades of that last week, I would say. And in the 6 games since he came back, 32.8% red zone share. That is not great, but it is better than Pacheco at 27.7 and McKinnon at 22.3, even Miles Sanders at 25%. So he's better than all those guys in that regard. So that gives you touchdown upside. There is a script where the Bengals roll in this game, and he'd benefit, I think, from that. Even with Samaje Perine getting a healthy amount of passing game work and running more routes than Mixon's still getting targets, 4.8 targets per game in this time. So I think he still has that upside. I think his odds of reaching it are slim enough to the point where I'd rather go with those guys. And the other thing too with Mixon is that he is $8,100, and in that same range, you have Devontae Smith at 77, AJ Brown 8,000. I mean, Jamar Chase kind of there at 86, Debo at 7,000. If I'm deciding between Pacheco in the flex and a receiver in that range, unless I can get to T at 67, I prefer Pacheco. Like I prefer Pacheco over Juju Smith-Schuster, Brandon Ayuk. I don't prefer Mixon over Devontae Smith, AJ Brown, Debo, Jamar Chase. I think that's the other thing for me is when I compare them to the wide receivers, I think Pacheco grades out better relative to those guys than Mixon does to the guys in his range.
Yeah. So we're like on the same page, but I think, once the final buzzer on the slate goes buzz,
What?
what a buzzer does.
Yeah, as buzzers do. Big buzzer boy over here.
Like like scale of 1 to 10, how surprised would you be that a Joe Mixon game happens and he scores like let's just copy paste from last week, like 19.3. Joe Burrow has like 2 touchdowns because Mixon is like more involved.
Scale of 1 to 10, how surprised am I?
That like Mixon has a good game and is therefore the best pure running back play of the slate.
3.5 out of 10.
So not that surprised. So
no.
So
but again, it's comparing him to the receivers. That's kind of thing that hangs me up. How surprised am I if AJ Brown goes nuts on a scale of 1 to 10?
Isn't there some squeaky wheel with AJ Brown too?
Yeah. They weren't saying if he was like mad because he wouldn't get back in because of his hip injury, or if he was like mad because he wasn't getting the ball. I think there is a bit of squeaky wheel there.
I don't know if squeaky wheel matters in the playoffs though.
And I think that AJ Brown's 90th percentile outcome is probably better than Joe Mixon's. Maybe you can actually fact check me on that, which I will allow you to do if you want to. But
what do we got here?
90th percentile outcomes for AJ Brown versus Joe Mixon.
I have this. The spreadsheet's like so big, it's hard to sort. and it might bust because this one tends to bust when I sort it. All right. I got Mixon like 24.
Okay.
They're basically the same.
Okay. Who do you think will have a higher roster rate? Well, I guess AJ Brown probably will because you have to roster 3 receivers. Yeah. So probably him. But so I'm a little bit more surprised. I think it's like 3.5 for Mixon, 3 for AJ Brown, 3.5 to 4 for Devontae Smith. For Jamar Chase, it's 2.
So this is basically one of those where like it sounds like we're low on Mixon, and we are, but not to the point that like if I was building a one lineup and trying to be as like different without being silly and like not roster, a 4-string tight end just to like be weird. Mixon might be part of that.
Sure. He is someone you should give thought to in that equation.
Yeah. Which again, I don't know if that sounds obvious. Like, yeah, Joe Mixon, like obviously, but like for us, we're coming at it from like his role's been pretty bad. Therefore, he's oversalaried. That being said, it's a 2-game slate, not a 12-game slate, and so he's still playable in that context. So I think he's probably the most fascinating. Despite like Mahomes, I think Mixon's probably the more fascinating play from a game theory standpoint for this one.
I think that's very fair. Let's talk about the pass catchers in this game. Starting off on the Bengals side, Jamar Chase, $8,600. We have T. Higgins, 67. T, buddy, please save me. Tyler Boyd is 53, and then we have Hayden Hurst at $5,400. I'm going to keep beating my head against a wall and using T. Higgins. I think that 67 for him is way too low. I know it's been a long time since we saw a team, but I still think that's within his range of outcomes. And he is the lowest salary guy before a teardrop. I think Debo is amazing at 7,000. I think that T is a little bit less amazing, but still very good. And then the drop off to Juju Smith-Schuster and Brandon Ayuk is precipitous. So I love T. Higgins. I want to get to Jamar Chase. And if I don't get McCaffrey, I'll be able to get to Jamar Chase pretty easily. So despite the fact I am going into this assuming that Mahomes is fully healthy and I want to be heavy on Mahomes, I'm higher on both Jamar Chase and T. Higgins than any Chiefs pass catcher, including Travis Kelce. As stupid as that sounds, where do you settle in on those two guys?
Chase and Higgins?
Yeah. And then talk about Boyd and Hurst as well.
Yeah, so in the playoffs, this team's this team's been fairly concentrated with their routes. The targets don't always follow necessarily, but like Chase is at 97% of the routes, Higgins at 90%, Tyler Boyd at 93%. I think you could do a lot worse on a 2-game slate than a player who's on the field in what game, presumably for us, we think is the higher scoring game. Hayden Hurst 74%, which is more than viable for a tight end tied to probably like the best pure quarterback play from like a passing standpoint this week if you have questions about Mahomes. So like I think that all 4 are in play. This is a big reason why I like this game more than I like the first game. For me, I'm going to prioritize the contrarian in me says I want to prioritize Jamar Chase over Christian McCaffrey regardless. I don't think I'll get too scared to do that in as many lineups as I would like. But Chase with his workload right now is pretty phenomenal. 14 weighted targets, like if you give proper context to a downfield target and a red zone target, 14 weighted targets per game in the playoffs, up from 10 just raw targets. Like it's a really, really good workload. We know how good he is. And in the snow, they were throwing him the ball, throwing some like tight targets in the end zone, like despite a flurry. So it's clear that they trust him and they're not going to go out this season without. So like whether they score and play from ahead, Chase is going to do that. If they fall behind, it's kind of a misnomer that you want to chase volume. Right. There's no way that like Jamar Chase doesn't see 8 targets on the low end. I'm sure that'll haunt me, but
do you think the T is a trap at 67 or no?
What makes you think he would be a good play? Let's start there.
Ceiling.
In
the games where they've had Chase, Higgins, and Hurst and Boyd all healthy, And Mixon. I have Mixon in there too. In the games with everyone healthy, Higgins, 21% target share, 29% deep, and 13.5% inside the red zone. That's a good roll. And they've had Jamar Chase for all those games. I think they are prioritizing Jamar Chase in the playoffs. I think they should prioritize Jamar Chase in the playoffs. But scale of 1 to 10, how surprised am I if T. Higgins goes for 100 yards on Sunday? 2. Not surprised at all. That's why I think he's a good play still.
Yeah, I think he's a good play too. That was like not a trick. It was just more like, let's clarify what it is that we're seeing here.
Right.
Frankly, one of the things I tried to do a better job of this year was tracking like when guys were down. He hasn't scored in 4 games. I did a trend earlier this year about like what that means. It's going to lower the salary. It's just been a minute since we saw a T game. That does not mean that he's not due necessarily, but that doesn't mean that his new baseline is under 10 FanDuel points, which is where he's been for, well, like 4 straight games or so. So, I mean, I'm in on T, love the salary. I might end up honestly having as much T Higgins as anybody else this week, just because of the salary being what it is.
Yeah. With the way salaries break down at wide receiver, I think that could be me too. And this should be obvious, but I have no opposition to pairing Chase and Higgins in the same lineup. Don't care. That's totally fine. What about between Tyler Boyd and Hayden Hurst? If you've got Joe Burrow and you want to have a lower salary piece in this game, I prefer Hurst because he fills tight ends. He actually has a higher target share than Boyd in the aforementioned sample with everyone healthy. Hurst is at 14%, Boyd 13.7%, Hurst 19% red zone share, Boyd 11%. So I actually prefer Hurst over Boyd, in large part because he fills tight ends. But Boyd will be less rostered this week than Hurst after the 2 touchdown game. So what's your thoughts on those two guys?
Yeah, some really strange like tight end splits in terms of defense for this week. Like the Chiefs have let up 9 touchdowns to tight ends. The 49ers, despite the black hole, have 5, and then the other 2 teams have let up 3. But there's been a lot of end zone targets against the Chiefs and the 49ers specifically. So like, there's some weird stuff. But for me, Hurst makes a lot of sense because he does fill that void. That's actually not true. There's not a void at tight end. There is a very scary, very scary name.
Supernova at tight end.
Yeah. But you're probably not playing Kelsey in every lineup. If you are, good on you. I would never fight anyone on that. But yeah, Hurst is just a natural pivot away from 3 tight ends who do have 100-yard multiple touchdown upside. As someone who recommended like Dallas Goedert, not over Kelsey like in a vacuum, but as someone who was a great pivot from Kelsey. I was watching closely. He could have scored multiple times last week. So like you are kind of gonna risk getting exposed because there's 3 slate changing tight ends, but I think I would lean Hurst over Boyd because there's the touchdown equity tied to this, and I like Tyler Boyd. I think he's like a fine player, but I don't think he's got 2 touchdown upside. Hurst seems to have that.
Yeah, I'd agree with that as well. Weirdly, Boyd's touchdown odds at FanDuel Sportsbook are shorter than Hurst's. I just saw that the money line on the Chiefs got back to 116, which is where I took it, and I no longer feel like a moron. Neutral CLV, baby. Do not ignore the route that it took to get there. Ignore that I got a bad number. Ignore it. You've been transfixed. You will ignore Jim's bad bets, but now it's no longer a bad bet. Waha. Okay, anyway. Let's talk about the Chiefs pass catchers here. You could not pay me to roster Juju Smith-Schuster at 61. I know it's a 2-game slate. I don't want it. Kadarius Toney's snap rate sucks. He ran 12 routes last week. But it's very clear that when he is out there, he is going to get the football. I would also say that Mecole Hardman at 55, if he gets a full practice in by Friday, could have a similar thought process where they've got these dusty dudes, they need playmakers, and Toney and Hardman can get that job done. So I had way too much Toney last week. It was a mistake, given that his role did not increase. But I'm willing to make that same mistake again. And I will also do it with Mecole Hardman. I would say I prefer Toney and Hardman over Juju Smith-Schuster. I prefer them over Marquez Valdez-Scantling, despite his touchdown last week. I'm a moron. You can tell me that, but like, how big of a moron am I?
It's just funny because like podcasting with you has its own intricacies. Like I'm sure podcasting with me is not fun either, but sometimes like you'll have a stand on something and I'm like, well, clearly I don't like I'm the moron because I'm not seeing a certain thing. And so then I start to believe it. And
Oh,
like
no.
this is
Did I
not
talk you into Tony last week?
look, yeah, I mean,
Sorry.
but like, you make the right points where he like when he's on the field, he's getting work, which is very important. Like his opportunity per snap rate is really strong. Doesn't mean that he's like a true wide receiver one for this team, but in the second half, he did get targeted 4 times.
Yeah.
With Kelsey at 6, nobody else had more than 2. So like, I'm not against Tony. I'm just not as high on him as you. Um, let's say like let's do a Tony scale. You were a 10 last week, full Tony. Where are you this week?
A 4 max. I can't go
Okay.
higher than a 4. It's a combination
Uh,
of what happened last week with those 12 routes and Mecole Hardman being back. Because I don't know who that impacts most. I have no idea what this team looks like with Mecole Hardman healthy and Kadarius Toney healthy. I have no
yeah.
idea. I have no idea. And I need to account for that. So if I am at 4 Tonys out of 10 on Kadarius Toney, I am at 3.5 Tonys on Mecole Hardman. I think both those guys have a path to a 20-point game that might sound ambitious, but I think both those guys have a path, a singular path to a 20-point game. I'm not sure if Juju does right now. So I think to me, I need to put a lid on my exposure to both, but I can put a lid on my exposure to both by cutting my, like, okay, I have a Tony lineup here. I'll do a Hardman lineup next. I want to make sure I don't have one of them in every lineup because they could both be bad. But I think both guys have a path to a ceiling. I think Tony's floor is still decent because of the.
Who are you?
I know. Sorry.
Talking
It's
about
different on a
floor.
2-game slate. You're right. But like, I think he'll get work no matter what because he's too talented not to. And that's a very bad pitch. It's pitch that's led people astray many times, but he's $5,600. He's not 7,000.
Hate that argument.
I mean,
no, I get it.
Yeah.
So like if you look at just routes from last week,
it's barely plural when you say routes with Tony. It was 12.
I have 11.
Oh wow, even worse. Good.
So Juju and Kelsey at 87%, Marquez Valdez Scanling 65%, Jarek 57%, Justin Watson, your boy, 49%.
He was my boy for like one game with Tampa Bay like 3 years ago. Does that count?
Noah Gray, your boy, 46%.
Noah Gray is my boy. I will take that.
So like, I complain sometimes about like teams that have one viable like pass catcher, and I say it's too hard to stack this game because I only have one route. The Chiefs have just sort of become over the years like, when it was Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce, it was like, well, just one of those two. But now it's basically Kelce, and then everyone else is spread out to the point that nobody's getting elevated workloads aside from Kelce, and so it's really hard unless you are just rolling. Like, I wouldn't fault anyone for building a lineup that they like that has one of these like tertiary guys from the Chiefs and duplicating that and then subbing in someone else. That I understand. Other than that, like building around these guys specifically, I have a hard time wrapping my head around. So
yeah, they are not priorities for me. My preference is to stay a T and higher at wide receiver, and I can do that with McCaffrey. It's not easy, but you can't use Kelce. But what I had was it was Burrow, T, Debo. I had both Sanders and Pacheco in there. I had, was it the Bengals defense? I don't know, something. And then if you put McCaffrey in at running back, you've got 71 left for a wide receiver. So you could go, I don't know, you have to reconfigure a bit, but like you can have a lineup with McCaffrey without using a lower salaried wide receiver. I almost said scrub, but I refuse to call Kadarius Toney and Mecole Hardman scrubs without using one of them. But
who was the tight end in that lineup?
Hurst.
So I think the most obvious build route is like Burrow or Mahomes.
Mm-hmm.
The tier 2 receivers
Mm-hmm.
take the savings with like Hurst. So it's basically like Burrow or Mahomes, and then the tier 2 receivers, and then take your pick between like Kelsey and all value backs or like McCaffrey and Hurst.
Yeah.
So I think that alone is what makes me want to ultimately at the end of the day, like if I was building one lineup with a combination of good process but also being different, it would be to build around like Jamar Chase and Travis Kelsey.
Sure.
Because
if you
people
do
aren't
that,
going to do that by default necessarily.
If you do that, you need a value wide receiver. Who would be your pick
Sure.
among the guys? Who's your
I
favorite?
think it would depend on what the rest of the lineup looked like. In that case, I'd probably be playing Burrow, so I might go Tyler Boyd.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Like I don't think Tyler Boyd's dusty. He's going to be running routes, and if I like that game, so I think like all of this talking for an hour about two games is not really overkill because there's a lot to talk about when game theory comes into play. I think going out of my way to prioritize Jamar Chase is looking very fun and not as obvious as some other routes because Debo and T are great plays at salary. That's not to say I wouldn't play Debo or T in that same lineup, but like Chase and Kelsey, I guess specifically seem like guys I would like to prioritize.
I want to look quick to see some projected roster rates. Obviously, it's Thursday and things will change based on McCaffrey's health and stuff like that. But as of right now, Chase is around 48% projected roster rate for the 2-game slates. McCaffrey also 48%.
What's Kelsey then?
Travis Kelsey is 33%. So maybe it's just Kelsey.
Like, look, the range of outcomes for a running back versus a receiver versus a tight end who's really like a receiver, those are all very different processes to figure out what the, we'll say floor, like, it's more likely if Christian McCaffrey's full that he scores more points than Travis Kelsey and Jamar Chase, but that does not, like, there's a big difference between one iteration of a game and what happens in that game. So maybe Kelsey, maybe he's the real leverage play here.
Does having Debo at 37 and T at 30% with Jamar at 47% dissuade you from making Jamar Chase the priority? I think you're right.
I don't think that's a big enough gap, honestly.
No, I think you're right. Yeah. You just kind of have to decide which value play you want to use. And there are enough here between the lower salary backs. I think that Boyd is fine. I think that Hardman and Tony have paths to upside. MBS is a person. Juwan Jennings is somewhat viable at 49. So like you've got guys you have to use, but you have to use one of them there, and that's fine.
So I think this goes back maybe to put a bow on everything from the start, like the slate overview is taking stands. Like, look, you can build 20 lineups that have 5 of each quarterback and like five of each of the 4 tight ends and like mix it up and do all that. Odds are you might have a lineup or two that's like relevant, but the other ones by nature will not be good. Like, I think taking a stand with I think Jamar Chase is going to get like 15 targets and be very good because he's Jamar Chase. I think Travis Kelsey is the only pass catcher that Patrick Mahomes trusts to throw the ball to. Like, I think this stack hits, and so I'm going to round out my lineup with the rest of the core plays, and then I'm going to have some value like that I need to fill. And then you kind of just rotate a few. And so, you're really exposed to Jamar Chase and Travis Kelsey. And if they don't have a good day, then sure, it's not a great weekend for you. But if you just spread that all out over all your lineups, it's going to be the same, like sort of the same result. You might feel a little bit better because you have exposure to everyone, but at least that's how I look at it. So,
yeah, I mean, everyone has their own process, but I think that the process of using everyone is probably flawed. So
the process of loading a bunch of Jamar Chase, I think, is defensible. So
I think the counterpoint would be the one situation where it's okay to use everyone else if you are going hard at assumption lineups. Like if you assume,
sure, yeah,
like if you assume in this script and that script leads you to having different players and you have a different script, fine, go that way. So it's a bit different in that regard, but other than that, I think that, having Boston Scott to have Boston Scott, that's flawed. Or having Brock Purdy just to have Brock Purdy is flawed.
Yeah. So like you could say, all right, I think that Brock Purdy throws for 300 multiple touchdowns. His FanDuel output is somewhat similar to what the other quarterbacks produce, and that the Bengals and Chiefs game is not so good. But like even if you're building let's say 20 lineups, therefore you have 5 of each. Your 5 Brock Purdy lineups might hit, but like if you go with Jamar Chase in one, T Higgins in one, like AJ Brown in one, like that's when mathematically things get squeezed.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're going to say, I think Brock Purdy's good, you might want 10 or 20 of your chances to try to hit the right combos. So like,
I'm not doing that Brock Purdy though, to be clear.
No, right. But again, I think that Brock Purdy's kind of fascinating from a game theory standpoint because there are realities once once kickoff hits and the realities just start to filter into the multitudes. Like there are some where Brock Purdy's the QB1 on the slate.
Sure. Good luck. I'll clip this for you and put it on Twitter when he does.
Yeah.
So yeah, don't
just
worry.
Me talking about like multiple realities. But I think ultimately I'm feeling really good about Joe Burrow and Patrick Mahomes. I think that's kind of the takeaway.
Yeah. Takeaway for me is I'm going to be high on Mahomes, assuming he's healthy. I'm going to be high on McCaffrey, assuming he's healthy. If he gets into full practice by Friday, I'll build my lineups based around those assumptions and see where that leads me. Any final thoughts for you, Brandon, before we close up for this 2-game slate?
Man, I got into like
multiple
parallel universe talks and stuff. I think I've said all I had to say. But
this is basically been a 1 hour and 12-minute trailer for Ant-Man, Quantum Mania. So
I don't know what that is.
You're welcome, Disney, for that. And we'll see how things play out on Sunday. What?
Actually, the one thing I would say is like I don't know if we talked enough about like AJ Brown. Like we talked about him, but he's like kind of lingering below the surface. He could be a very, very fun play.
Might be. Maybe he is. Maybe he's not.
Oh, I'm gonna play Chase and AJ Brown lineups.
Oh yeah, that's fun. I like that. Okay,
but I think that's gonna be.
That is all that we have here for today. We will have a single game helper for the Super Bowl coming up week of. Don't know what day. Don't want to decide right now. We'll figure that out later on. But the way to get that, as it's posted, is by subscribing to the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed. No guesswork there. It'll pop into your podcast feed as it is posted. So just search for the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed wherever you get your podcasts. You get NBA, PGA, UFC, NFL, all in the same place, wherever you get your podcasts. Brandon, if people have questions for you on Twitter, where can they find you there?
I'm on Twitter at Gdula13, GDULA13.
And I am on Twitter at Jim Sannes, JIMSANNES. You can also follow the FanDuel Podcast Network at FanDuel Podcast. I want to thank you all for tuning in for today. Good luck to you with your conference championship lineups. We'll talk to you once again in 2 weeks before Super Bowl, whatever number this is. We'll talk to you then. This has been the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast powered by numberFire.